He sat alone at the corner booth of a small-town diner, calloused hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, convinced his blind date had stood him up. But just as he was about to leave, 4 little girls in red jackets burst through the door. "Our mommy's sorry she's late," one of them said. What happened next would not only change his life, it would heal a family, rewrite the meaning of love after loss, and remind us all that sometimes the most extraordinary beginnings come disguised as simple delays. If this story touches your heart the way it touched ours, consider subscribing to our channel for more true-to-life tales of second chances, kindness, and quiet courage. Now, let's begin. The wind whispered through the rusted flagpole outside Maple Diner, rattling the old chain like a distant battlefield memory. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in rural Virginia, the kind where time moved a little slower, and the scent of fresh pie and black coffee clung to the air like a comforting old song. Ben Lawson stood outside the diner for a moment, before entering his green field jacket flapping slightly in the breeze. The worn Delta Force patch on the sleeve had long faded, and the edges of his collar were frayed like the man himself. His hair, still thick, but graying at the temples, fell just past his ears, brushing against the lines carved by war grief and the quiet ache of fatherhood. He reached for the handle but paused, glancing at the reflection in the window, a man others might mistake for tired or rough, but whose eyes still held something unbroken. Ben took a breath and stepped inside. The familiar jingle of the bell above the door stirred a few heads in the small diner. Elderly couples in plaid a trucker, nursing a plate of meatloaf, 2 young Marines in casual off-duty dress, all glanced his way and nodded, then returned to their meals. They didn't know him, not personally, but they knew the look. Quiet. Alone. Veteran. Ben, a voice called gently from behind the counter. He turned and smiled. It was Doris, the waitress who'd been serving at Maple Diner since before his first deployment. Her white apron was stained with syrup and coffee, but her eyes were warm maternal. "Your friend called ahead. Said you had a date today," she asked with a raised brow, half teasing. Ben chuckled softly. "So I've been told." Doris nodded toward the corner booth, the one with the best view of the window, the same booth where old veterans used to gather back in the day, where stories of war and laughter blended with the smell of bacon and burnt toast. He slid into the booth, slowly setting his hands on the table, as if anchoring himself there. His fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug as Doris poured him some hot coffee. "You let me know if she doesn't show home," she said kindly. "We'll give her the benefit of the doubt, but only for 10 minutes, he smirked. "I'll hold you to that." As Doris walked away, Ben gazed out the window. The street beyond was mostly empty, except for the occasional passing car or cyclist. In the corner of the diner, a soft country song played through the old jukebox, something about broken hearts and coming home. Appropriate, he thought. Minutes passed. He sipped the bitter coffee. The steam rose lazily from the cup, disappearing just like every hopeful moment before this one. He checked his watch. 4:23. She was supposed to arrive at 4 sharp. He didn't blame her. Most people didn't look twice after the initial conversation. Once they knew he was a single father, a widower, and a former soldier, with more baggage than a Greyhound station, they quietly disappeared. Blind dates weren't his thing. But his friend Marcus, a former Marine buddy, turned hopeless. Romantic had insisted. "She's different," Marcus had said. "Tough, smart, beautiful. You'll like her." Ben smiled bitterly. "Apparently not enough to show up," he muttered. The diner door opened, and instinctively he looked up. But it wasn't her. Instead, 4 tiny figures tumbled through the entrance, like a whirlwind of red jackets, curls and giggles. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, and she stood tall, hands on her hips, like a pint-sized general. Behind her, 3 identical girls peered up at Ben with wide eyes and matching dimples. They marched right up to his table, stopping inches from him. The oldest took a breath, then declared in the clearest voice, "Our mommy's sorry she's late." Ben blinked. His brain stumbled over the sentence like it had hit a landmine. He glanced around. The entire diner had fallen quiet. Doris froze mid-pour. The Marines looked up from their phones. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. "Excuse me," Ben asked gently. "She said to tell you she's coming," the girl repeated, lifting her chin proudly. "She just had to park." The 3 others nodded in solemn agreement, as if they'd rehearsed this for weeks. Ben looked down at them, utterly speechless. 4 girls, 2 sets of twins, all in red faux leather jackets and white blouses. And somehow, here to see him. Before he could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. And this time, it was her. A woman stepped into the diner, her green military coat still buttoned high, snow dust clinging to the shoulders. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a neat low bun, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. There was something commanding in the way she carried herself, even though her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept much in weeks. "Ben," she asked, catching her breath. He stood a bit too fast and knocked his knee on the table. "Yes." "Laura Brooks," she said, reaching out a hand. "Colonel." The name clicked. Marcus had mentioned it, but Ben hadn't expected her to still be active duty. "I'm so sorry I'm late," Laura said, pulling off her gloves. There was a situation at the base last-minute debrief, and these 4 insisted on delivering the message themselves. Ben looked at the girls again, who now swarmed around her like ducklings returning to their mother. "I thought it was a prank," he admitted, chuckling under his breath. Laura laughed softly. "I don't usually bring the whole squad on a first date." But they wouldn't take no for an answer. He gestured toward the booth. "Well, now that the messengers have done their job, would you like to sit?" She nodded, suddenly a bit shy, and slid into the booth across from him. The girls jumped into the neighboring booth, still watching with gleeful curiosity. Ben sat down, slowly, still trying to catch up. "4 daughters?" he asked, voice warm. "2 sets of twins," she replied with a proud grin. "It's my own private infantry unit," Ben chuckled. "Well, Colonel, your troops are impressive." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Call me Laura. Only if you call me Ben." For the first time all day, Ben's smile wasn't forced. Outside, the wind howled again. But inside Maple Diner, something had shifted. The once empty table was no longer just a table. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Not a blind date, but maybe a homecoming. If there was one thing Ben Lawson had learned in his time as a soldier, it was how to adapt. But nothing in combat had prepared him for the sheer chaos of 4 giggling girls crammed into the booth beside him. It had started with the crayons. Maple Diner, in its small-town charm, kept a stash of coloring menus and broken Crayolas in an old cookie tin. Before Laura even had a chance to sip her water, the girls had secured the tin and spread out their chosen colors like a tactical operation. Ben watched them amused and slightly terrified. The oldest Lily was clearly the leader. She handed out tasks like a junior officer. "You do the pancakes. I'll do the flag. Remember, no going outside the lines. That's an order." Across the table, Laura gave Ben a look. "Don't worry, they only stage coups on Sundays." Ben laughed softly, then leaned in. "How do you tell them apart, secret weapon?" she whispered, pointing subtly. Lily has a tiny freckle on her left cheek. Lucy, second oldest. She hums when she colors. Leah's the one constantly pushing her sleeves up. And Lexi, she's always the one sneaking extra sugar packets. As if on cue, Lexi reached for a pink Sweet and Low, and tried to quietly stuff it into her jacket pocket. Ben arched a brow. Impressive. 4 kids. Military precision. Survival instinct, Laura said with a tired grin. After I lost their dad, I didn't really have the luxury of easing into motherhood. It was boot camp and bedtime stories, all in one. Ben's smile faded just slightly at the mention of her late husband. He didn't press. Some silences didn't need filling. Instead, he stirred his coffee, then asked gently, "And they're okay with everything?" Laura nodded. "They're stronger than I am most days. Grief, it's messy. But kids don't analyze it the way adults do. They cry when they need to. Then they play. And somehow, they find joy again." Ben looked at the girls, their laughter rising in little bursts as they compared scribbles. A pang hit his chest. It was the kind of noise he hadn't heard in his house in years. "What about you?" Laura asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Marcus said you have a daughter." He nodded. "Samantha. 9. She's staying with my sister this weekend. Otherwise, she'd be here interrogating your girls by now." Laura smiled. "Divorced. Widowed." His voice dropped a notch. "Car accident. 4 years ago." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "So am I," he replied. "But I have her, and she's the best thing I've ever done." Laura tilted her head, curious. And the worst, Ben smirked. "Online dating." She laughed, a rich, genuine laugh that turned a few heads in the diner. "Well, you're surviving this one." "For now," he said, then leaned closer. "Unless the little one poisons me with sugar packets." At that, Lexi popped her head up, eyes wide. "I didn't do anything." Laura gave her a warning look, but Ben just winked. "I won't tell." The waitress Doris returned with a tray full of food. She slid a plate of golden pancakes in front of each girl, along with 2 steaming plates for the adults. Laura's was a veggie omelet. Ben's the classic corned beef hash. "Family special," Doris said with a knowing smile. "On the house." "Oh no, we couldn't possibly," Laura began. Doris cut her off with a look. "Colonel, I've been working this diner for 37 years. Let me do something nice without arguing." Laura blinked, then nodded. "Thank you." Doris leaned in toward Ben. "She's a keeper, Han." He blushed slightly. "We'll see." As the food was served, conversation melted into comfort. The girls devoured their pancakes with impressive speed. Laura kept dabbing syrup off their fingers. Ben just watched. Not in a creepy way, in that quiet, aching kind of way. Only someone who's missed something deeply can understand. He hadn't realized how loud the silence in his life had become. "How long were you in?" Laura asked. 4 tours, he said. Afghanistan mostly. A little time in Djibouti and Iraq. I was Delta Force, but I don't talk about it much. People assume things. Laura nodded. "I know the feeling." He raised an eyebrow. "Colonel, at your age, that's not exactly average." "I was fast-tracked," she admitted. "Army intelligence. Started as a linguist. Worked my way up." "Languages?" he asked. "Arabic. Farsi. A little Russian. I used to be useful." Ben gave her a long look. "You still are." She blinked, caught off guard. There was no flirtation in his tone. Just sincerity. And somehow, that was more disarming than charm. They ate quietly for a moment. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows just enough to draw attention. Inside, the diner felt like a cocoon. Safe. Warm. Alive. "Funny," Laura said almost to herself. "I was dreading this date. Me too." And now Ben looked around the table. Syrupy fingers, sticky menus, 2 empty creamers, and 4 little girls, who had somehow cracked open something in his chest he hadn't known was still there. "Now," he said slowly, "I'm wondering what took us so long." Laura stared at him for a beat, then gave a small, genuine smile. "You know," she said, "I almost canceled. Twice." Work got messy. The girls were cranky. And, well, I didn't think I was ready. Ben tilted his head. And now she hesitated, then reached across the table not for his hand, but to flick a stray sugar packet away from his plate. Now I think, maybe the girls were the ones who were ready. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes loose something old and heavy. Across the booth, Lily raised her hand. "Mommy, yes, baby. Can we come back here again tomorrow?" Laura opened her mouth, but it was Ben who answered. "If your mom says yes," he said, smiling, "I'll make sure your pancakes are waiting." Lily beamed. "With extra whipped cream," Double Ben said. Laura looked at him, really looked. And in that moment, surrounded by sticky napkins and lopsided coloring pages, she realized something strange and wonderful. This didn't feel like a first date anymore. It felt like something they'd both been heading toward for a very long time. Not fate, not coincidence, just timing. Maybe love didn't arrive with flowers and perfect timing. Maybe sometimes it showed up late, escorted by 4 little messengers in red jackets. Later that evening, the corner booth at Maple Diner felt like the safest place on earth. The girls had finished their pancakes and drifted into quiet coloring and whispered giggles. The sugar high had faded, replaced by the gentle lull that always followed a warm meal and the comfort of safety. Outside, dusk settled like a soft quilt over the town. Inside, the diner's hanging lights flickered gently, casting golden halos across the Formica tables. Ben leaned back, his arm resting loosely on the top of the booth. Across from him, Laura sipped her lukewarm coffee with both hands wrapped around the mug. Her military posture had softened. The slight tension in her shoulders, the invisible armor she wore so naturally, was beginning to slip away. He noticed, but didn't call it out. Some healing didn't need narration. "You ever think," she said quietly, "that all of this wasn't meant for you anymore?" Ben raised an eyebrow. "I mean," she glanced at the girls. "Dates, dinners, new beginnings, that maybe life already handed you your share and you were supposed to be done." He nodded slowly. "Every single morning." Laura smiled faintly. "I thought I was broken for a long time, not in the dramatic way. Just quietly. Like a watch that still ticks, but doesn't keep time." Ben reached for the coffee pot, refilled her mug gently, then his. "I think," he said, "there's a kind of courage in showing up anyway, even when you're late, even when you think you've got nothing left to give." Her eyes flicked to his. "You think I'm courageous for showing up late? I think you're courageous for showing up at all." She looked away, but not because she disagreed. Ben stirred cream into his mug, the liquid swirling like smoke. There was a time I'd sit in silence like this and feel hollow, like I was waiting for the noise to come back. And now I think I was just waiting for the right kind of silence. Laura studied him for a moment. "You're not what I expected. I get that a lot." "No, I mean," she tilted her head, "I thought you'd be harder, sharper. You've seen more war than most, and yet I talk about coffee like it's a religion." She smiled. "Exactly." Ben's voice turned quiet. "War makes you hard in some places and soft in others. The trick is knowing which part of you to protect and which part you're willing to share." Laura took a slow sip of coffee. The words settled between them like something sacred. He continued, "When I lost my wife, I became a machine. Wake up, pack lunch, get Samantha to school, work, dishes, sleep, repeat. People thought I was strong, but I wasn't strong. I was surviving. And now," he looked at her, "now I want to live." The diner door opened, letting in a gust of cool wind and a blast of street light. A teenager in a varsity jacket entered, headed straight for the counter. The moment broke, but only for a second. Laura set her mug down and leaned forward. "You asked me about the girls earlier," she said. "If they were okay." Ben nodded. "I used to worry they were missing out on something," she admitted. "A normal childhood, a dad at dance recitals, homemade lunches. But I've realized they've gained something too. They've seen what resilience looks like, what love means when it's not easy or pretty, just persistent." Ben smiled. "That's more than most grown-ups ever learn." Laura ran a hand through her hair, loosening the bun slightly. A few strands fell across her cheek, softening her even more. "And what about your daughter Samantha?" His expression lit up at the name. "She's my world. Smart as a whip. Makes pancakes better than I do." Laura raised a skeptical brow. "I find that hard to believe." "It's true. She uses cinnamon in the batter game changer." "Noted." "She's the reason I got through the darkest parts," he said, his voice thickening slightly. "There were nights I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe, but she'd knock on the bedroom door, ask for a story, and I'd force myself up, one foot after the other. That's how you make it through the mud." Laura didn't speak right away. Then, almost reverently, she said, "I remember once, after a mission, I saw a child walk out of the wreckage barefoot, covered in ash, no parents in sight, and all she did was reach for my hand. Ben didn't move, didn't blink. She didn't ask for a weapon or protection, just contact. And did you take her hand?" Laura nodded slowly. "It was the only thing I could do." They fell silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was whole. Doris approached the table, setting down a slice of pie between them. "Apple. On the house again. I figured it's the least I can do for the first real love story this diner's seen in years." Ben opened his mouth to protest, but Doris shot him a warning glare. Laura chuckled. "We're becoming local celebrities," he grinned. "Maybe we'll be on the menu next week. Colonel's Courage coffee and Single Dad surprise hash." She laughed a full-bodied laugh that reached her eyes. "Please don't give them ideas." From the next booth over, Lily suddenly leaned over the seat divider. "Mommy, can we come back again? I like the funny man." Laura raised an amused brow. "Funny man." Ben tilted his head. "I'll take it." Lucy, Leah, and Lexi all chimed in with variations of, "He's nice, and he makes good jokes, and can he bring his daughter next time?" Ben looked to Laura, letting her answer. She smiled softly. "Maybe." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a no. The girls resumed their chatter this time, drawing what looked like stick figure versions of Ben with a cape and pancakes in his hands. Laura looked at him, her expression unreadable at first. Then she said, "You know what I was most afraid of when I walked in today?" Ben waited. "That I'd feel nothing. And now," she exhaled slowly, "now I feel too much." He understood that better than she could ever know. The slice of pie between them sat untouched. Neither of them moved to take a bite, not because they weren't hungry, but because they were already full of something new, something good. Hope. They lingered in the diner long after the sun had disappeared behind the hills, long after most of the booths had emptied, and the air inside took on that late evening stillness. Soft clinks of forks against plates, the low hum of the overhead fan, and the distant sound of a dish being scrubbed in the back. Laura's coffee had gone cold, but she cradled it anyway. Ben, sitting across from her, had shifted his posture, more relaxed now, one arm slung behind the booth, as if this were familiar territory. And maybe in some strange way it was. But beneath the warmth, there was a current neither of them could ignore, the invisible weight of rank service and all the things unsaid. Laura stared at the girls, now huddled in their own booth, leaning on each other in the drowsy comfort only children could conjure after a day well lived. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Ben noticed. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. Then after a beat, "Do you ever feel like the uniform follows you home?" Ben didn't answer right away. He studied her face, the composed lines softened by fatigue, the sharpness of her eyes dimmed only slightly by the hour. She was the kind of woman who knew how to lead a room with a single look. But here, in this quiet booth, she wasn't a commanding officer. She was just a mother trying to find her place in a world that had never made room for both roles. "Yeah," Ben said finally. "Even when I take it off, it's still there." Laura traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "There are nights I lie awake wondering if I've failed them. Not just as a mother, as a woman, as someone who can't seem to stop serving something." "You didn't fail them," Ben said quietly. "You protected them. You're still protecting them." "But at what cost?" she whispered. Ben leaned forward. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" She blinked. "What I see: a woman who shows up, who leads with strength and heart, who fights on two fronts, one in uniform and one at the dinner table. I see someone who hasn't let the world harden her. And I see 4 little girls who adore their mother without conditions." She looked away, jaw tightening slightly. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he said. "But that doesn't make it any less true." For a moment the silence stretched between them, thick and full of things unsaid. Then she breathed in deeply, as if drawing courage from the air around her. "I used to think men were afraid of women like me," she said softly. "Not just the uniform, but the scars, the memories, the responsibilities, the 4 tiny tornadoes that come with me wherever I go." Ben smiled. "I think the right kind of man sees all that, and stays anyway." She looked up, her eyes meeting his, and in them he saw not the colonel, not the mother, but the woman. And she saw him too, not just a single dad or a soldier past his prime, but a man who'd endured and chosen love again, even if it terrified him. "I've seen men walk away from less," she said. "One guy told me he couldn't handle the fact that I outranked him, and we weren't even on base." Ben chuckled. "That's not insecurity. That's cowardice dressed as ego." Another pause. Then slowly, Laura reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a ribbon folded tightly olive green with 3 bronze stars. "This was my husband's," she said. "I keep it with me every time I go on assignment. He died in a joint op. Friendly fire. And I still haven't told the girls the truth. They think he died a hero. And maybe that's enough." Ben's expression didn't change. He simply said, "Sometimes the truth we carry isn't the truth we tell. Not because we're liars, but because we're parents." She looked at him sharply. "You've done that too." He nodded. "Samantha thinks her mother died peacefully. She didn't. It was violent. Ugly. But she doesn't need that image in her head. Not now. Maybe not ever." Laura stared at him, then slowly folded the ribbon back into her coat. "You know, I never expected to talk about this with anyone," she said. "And yet here we are." "Yeah," she murmured. "Here we are." Outside the diner window, headlights flashed briefly as a car turned onto the street. The town was slipping into sleep, porch lights flickering on the hum of life winding down. Inside, the warmth from the overhead lamps made the booth feel like a tiny shelter from the world. Ben glanced at the girls, now fully asleep in a nest of jackets and coloring pages. "I should probably get them home," Laura said reluctantly. Ben nodded, but neither of them moved. "Would you?" She began, then stopped. "Would you think less of me if I said I didn't want this night to end?" Ben's reply was soft but immediate. "No. I'd think you're human." She smiled. "That's new. I mean it," he said. "You've spent your life being the strong one, the reliable one. But tonight, you let someone in. That takes a different kind of strength. Her gaze didn't leave his. So what happens next? He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. White plain with his number, handwritten in neat black ink. "I don't believe in fate," he said, "but I do believe in good decisions." And tonight felt like one. She took the card, brushing her thumb over the ink. "What if I'm not ready?" Ben looked at her with the quiet steadiness of someone who'd rebuilt himself from ashes. "Then I'll wait," he said, "because you're worth waiting for." She didn't respond right away, but she didn't let go of the card either. Ben stood slowly, careful not to disturb the girls. Laura followed, gathering their coats and shoes, her movements practiced and gentle. As they made their way to the door, Doris waved from behind the counter. "Same booth tomorrow," she teased. Laura smiled, tucking the card into her pocket. "We'll see." Ben held the door open for her. As she stepped into the cool night air, the wind tugged at her hair. The girls were still dozing in her arms, their cheeks pressed against her shoulder, breathing slow and even. She turned back to him one last time. "Good night, Ben." He gave a small nod. "Good night, Colonel." And with that, she disappeared into the night. Not a soldier, not a symbol, but a woman walking through the shadows of service, toward something that might finally be hers. The next morning arrived wrapped in early spring sunlight, the kind that peeked gently through the clouds, as if asking permission to warm the day. At Maple Diner, Doris was already flipping pancakes behind the counter, humming along to Patsy Cline on the old jukebox. The scent of bacon maple syrup and freshly brewed coffee wove through the air like a soft invitation. And then the bell above the door rang. Ben Lawson stepped in, wearing the same worn green field jacket jeans, a shade too faded, and the faintest smile pulling at the corners of his lips. But something was different today. He didn't hesitate at the door. He didn't glance around like he was bracing himself for disappointment. He walked straight toward their booth, and sat down. Doris peeked over the counter. "You again," he shrugged. "You said the coffee was bottomless." She poured him a fresh cup with a knowing look. "So, is this a tactical recon, or are we expecting friendly reinforcements?" Ben sipped. "We'll see." A few minutes later, the reinforcements arrived. The door swung open, and in marched the Brooks girls, Lily, Lucy, Leah, and Lexi, still in their matching red jackets, chattering like 4 separate radio stations each on full volume. Behind them, Laura appeared less like a commanding officer today, and more like a mother who'd wrestled 4 tiny hurricanes into clothes and shoes before 9 a.m. Her hair was loose this time, tumbling past her shoulders. Her uniform was replaced with a soft cream sweater and jeans. She looked lighter, realer, and somehow even more beautiful. Ben stood instinctively pulling out the bench for her as the girls scrambled into their side of the booth, already requesting syrup, whipped cream, and extra butter, please. Laura raised an amused eyebrow. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Ben grinned. "I survived 6 months in Kandahar with no air support and a busted sat phone. I think I can handle pancakes." Famous last words, she said, sliding into the seat. The waitress returned with a tray full of food. Doris, of course, had prepared for this. 2 full stacks of pancakes for each girl, plus fruit chocolate chips and whipped cream served in silver gravy boats. It was chaos in plate form. As the girls tore into their food, Ben leaned in and whispered, "Does this count as your cheat day, or mine?" "Yours," Laura replied. "I gave up sugar years ago. Then why do I feel like I'm the one getting played?" She laughed, and it wasn't the polite kind. It was full-throated, uncontrolled, with a hand on her chest, and her eyes squeezed shut. Ben felt something settle inside him. Like laughter had become a language. They'd both forgotten how to speak, and now they were slowly remembering it together. "You know," he said between sips of coffee, "I think they've adopted me." Laura gave him a sideways look. "Oh, and how can you tell?" "Well," he gestured discreetly. Lexi had climbed halfway onto his lap, attempting to show him her pancake art, which to her credit did look vaguely like a unicorn, if the unicorn had been through a blender. She usually reserves that level of proximity for stuffed animals and crustless sandwiches, Laura murmured. Ben smiled, resting one hand on the back of Lexi's shoulder to steady her. "I'm honored." The booth around them felt like its own little world, syrup, sticky and sun-drenched, filled with giggles, napkin origami, and the occasional dramatic reenactment of who did or did not eat the last blueberry. Ben found himself slipping into it without resistance. He helped cut pancakes, poured orange juice, told a bad dad joke that made Lucy snort milk, and folded a napkin into a swan, though Leah insisted it looked more like a dying goose. Laura leaned back and watched it all quietly. It wasn't the noise that struck her. She was used to that. It was the ease. The way Ben never rushed, never overstepped, but somehow made space for each of her girls, like they'd always been there. He asked questions. He listened. He laughed at the right moments, and didn't pretend to have all the answers. It was unfamiliar and wonderful. After the plates were nearly clean and the whipped cream battle had reached a truce, Laura stood and whispered something to Doris before returning to the table. Ben looked up. "What's the strategy?" She smiled. "Come with me." "Where are we going?" "You'll see." The girls groaned as they were told to stay at the booth, but a promise of milkshakes after kept them occupied. Laura led Ben to the back of the diner through a narrow hallway and out the side door. There behind the building was a small wooden bench overlooking a patch of grass where the sun hit just right. She sat down and patted the space beside her. Ben joined, still a little unsure. Laura reached into her bag and pulled out 2 paper cups, coffee fresh and steaming. "I saw you drink that swamp water inside," she said. "Figured we both deserved something better." He chuckled, accepting the cup. "I'm sensing a pattern here. Coffee and courage." She looked out at the field, sunlight catching the edges of her profile. "You want to know something strange?" "Always. I haven't had someone to share this part of the day with in years. Not the big moments, just this. Quiet. No commands to give. No fires to put out. Just coffee. Sunlight. Someone who knows how to sit still." Ben didn't speak for a moment. Then he said softly, "I didn't know how to sit still until I met you." She turned, surprised. He continued, "Everything before, this was noise, memory, regret, routine. But with you, I feel like I've stepped outside of the static." Her eyes softened. "That's exactly how I feel." They sat in silence, drinking coffee. After a long pause, Laura said, "Ben, I don't want to mess this up." "You won't. I mean, I'm still in uniform. The real one. The girls come first. I have deployments, looming responsibilities that don't stop." Ben nodded. "And I've got a daughter who still has nightmares sometimes. I run on guilt and black coffee. My past is complicated." Laura looked at him fully. "So why does this feel so simple?" "Because it's real." She exhaled, then reached for his hand, tentative at first, then certain. He took it. Fingers laced gently. No fanfare. No drama. Just 2 people who'd been through the worst daring for the first time in a long time to believe in something good. From inside the diner, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the walls, and for once it didn't feel like an interruption. It felt like a beginning. The sun had long dipped behind the hills when Ben pulled into the quiet cul-de-sac where Laura lived. The neighborhood was modest, a row of small brick homes with well-worn porches and flags fluttering under porch lights. It was the kind of place where people still waved to each other over fences and brought casseroles when someone was sick. In the back seat, the 4 Brooks girls had fallen asleep in a messy pile of tangled limbs, drooping ponytails, and syrup-stained sleeves. The aftermath of pancakes and milkshakes had hit them like a tranquilizer dart. Soft breaths filled the car, and every now and then, one would shift and mumble in her sleep. Laura turned to look at them, her features illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. Her hair was tousled, and a fine trace of flour still dusted her sweater sleeve from helping Lexi build a whipped cream castle. Ben didn't speak. He just sat there, letting the silence settle, letting the moment live. Then Laura whispered, "They haven't been this quiet since 2020. He smiled. "It's a miracle." She nodded. Or divine intervention. A quiet chuckle passed between them, but then, almost as if the air itself had changed, something in Laura's posture stiffened. Her eyes drifted toward the curb ahead. A vehicle had pulled up at the edge of the driveway. Dark green, military markings, a government SUV. Ben's smile faded. His hand instinctively went to the key, turning the engine off, though it was already too late. The rear door opened. A man in a sharply pressed uniform stepped out, tall, built like a linebacker, his hair, a regulation buzz-cut, posture rigid. The moment Laura saw him, her entire body changed. She straightened, chin lifted, shoulders squared. Ben didn't have to ask who it was. The man approached the driver's side window and gave a crisp knock, his knuckles rapping against the glass. Laura rolled it down slowly. "Colonel Brooks," the man said, voice deep, precise. "Apologies for the intrusion. I was instructed to deliver this in person." He handed over a sealed envelope. The words, "Department of Defense," were stamped on the front in bold black ink. Laura didn't open it. "What's the nature of the order?" she asked, her tone shifting into full military command. The man, Major Daniel Briggs, based on the tag on his chest, hesitated. "Reactivation under emergency authorization. European Command. Classified briefing tomorrow at 0700. Her hand tightened around the envelope. "Duration undetermined." Ben stayed quiet. He didn't move, just listened. Major Briggs looked toward the back seat where the girls remained asleep, oblivious. For a moment, the hardened lines in his face softened. "Permission to speak freely," Ma'am Laura gave a slow nod. "You don't have to say yes." Laura stared at him. "But they'll ask again if I don't." He didn't deny it. She nodded, and he turned, walking briskly back to the SUV. The engine started, the brake lights flared, and then silence. The government vehicle rolled away into the night, like a shadow fading into darkness. Ben let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Laura still hadn't opened the envelope. She just sat there, staring straight ahead. "I told them no 3 times before," she said, finally. "I thought that was it. I thought they'd stop asking." "They don't stop," Ben said quietly. "Not when you're good. And you're better than good." She glanced at him. That's the problem. He didn't argue. Instead, he looked back at the girls, still curled together, like one living, breathing unit. Laura held the envelope in her lap like it might explode. "You don't have to open it tonight," Ben offered. "I already know what's in it," she said. He studied her, and she turned to him, her voice calm. Too calm. "I'm tired of choosing." Ben frowned. "Choosing what between being who I am and being who they need." The words hung in the air like a blade. Ben nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I know that choice," he said. "I made it once. Cost me everything but my daughter." Laura's hands trembled slightly, but she masked it by brushing hair from her face. "I never told anyone," she murmured, "but after my husband died, I thought maybe I'd get out. Start fresh. Civilian life. Safer. Quieter." But then the missions kept coming. Promotions. Orders. And I kept saying yes. Because it's what I knew how to do." She looked at him, eyes wet but not breaking. And now, just when I finally feel like I'm starting over, like I can have something real again. Ben didn't flinch. "They show up." She nodded. He reached over, gently taking the envelope from her hands, setting it on the dashboard. "I can't tell you what to do," he said. "I won't," she swallowed. But I know this, those girls are your mission now, and you don't need a rank to serve." Her eyes widened just a little, her breath catching. He continued, voice low but steady. "You've led troops, faced combat, made life and death calls. But what you did this weekend, showing up, laughing, letting yourself be someone outside the uniform that took more courage than all of it." She blinked back, the emotion turning away. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he said. "But maybe that's where the real stuff begins." Laura turned to face him again, and for the first time since the knock on the window, she smiled, not out of habit, not for show, but because something in his words had touched a place buried deep beneath the years of command and sacrifice. A real smile. Quiet. Fragile. Brave. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. Ben nodded. "Then don't decide tonight." She reached for his hand. He didn't hesitate. Their fingers met between the seats just enough to anchor one another. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was honest. "I should carry them in," she said softly, motioning to the girls. "I'll help." They exited the truck, and one by one Ben carried the sleeping girls inside with Laura guiding the way. He was careful, gentle, each lift a small act of tenderness. By the time he tucked the last one into the living room couch, a blanket draped over her, like a shield. Laura was standing at the doorway watching him. She said nothing, but when he stepped close to say goodbye, she pressed her forehead lightly against his. No kiss, no words, just presence. When he left, the night air felt heavier, but not hopeless. And inside the house, under the soft glow of a table lamp, the envelope sat untouched on the counter, unopened, but not forgotten. Morning came gently to the Lawson house. The filtered light through half-closed blinds cast soft shadows on the hardwood floor, mingling with the quiet hum of a kettle heating on the stove. In the living room, Ben sat at the edge of an old wooden trunk, its surface worn smooth by time and fingertips. He held a letter in his hand, folded 3 times, the paper yellowing slightly at the edges. It had no address, no stamp, no name on the front. Just ink, neat and deliberate, and years of emotion pressed into every stroke. Samantha was still asleep upstairs. She always slept in on Sundays, wrapped in blankets like a tiny cocoon. Ben had learned not to wake her, not just because she was 9, but because Sunday mornings had become sacred. Quiet. Slow. A time for reflection. He unfolded the letter and read it again. "Dear Laura," he stopped, smiled faintly, and shook his head. It wasn't that Laura. The letter had been written years ago. To a Laura he never met. A hypothetical woman, someone he imagined might come into his life someday, long after war and widowhood and the ache of rebuilding had passed. Back then, writing these letters had been the only way he could hope. He reached into the trunk and pulled out the small wooden box nestled inside. The lid creaked as he opened it. Dozens of letters, all unsent. Each began the same way, "Dear Laura." He had no idea why he'd picked that name all those years ago. It had just fit. Mysterious. Warm. Strong. A woman who wouldn't be frightened off by silence or scars. A woman who'd understand. Now there was a real Laura, and the thought of it, the impossible symmetry of it all, made his chest tighten. He placed the letter back in the box, then closed the lid with care, as if sealing in something sacred. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Ben stood, slowly curious. When he opened it, he didn't expect to see her. Laura stood there in civilian clothes again, jeans, black boots, a gray t-shirt under a light jacket. No rank, no uniform. Her eyes were tired, but clear. And in her hand, she held the same government envelope from the night before. Ben stepped aside. She walked in without a word, her movements purposeful, but slow, like someone approaching a line they weren't sure they were ready to cross. He gestured to the kitchen. "Coffee," she nodded. "Please." He poured 2 cups and handed her one, watching as she cupped it between her palms. They sat at the small table near the window. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Laura set the envelope down between them. "I didn't open it," she said. Ben looked at it. "I know," she exhaled. "They want me in Germany. Logistics command. Could be 6 months. Could be 12. He nodded slowly. "I haven't made a decision yet," she added, as if needing to clarify. "I'm not here to sway you," Ben said. "Whatever choice you make, I'll respect it." She stared down into her coffee. "I know. That's what makes this harder." Ben leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "What do you want, Laura?" "I want to serve," she answered too quickly, then paused. "But I also want to stop. I want to wake up and not feel torn in half. I want to raise my daughters without wondering if I'll miss another birthday. I want to be more than my title." Ben didn't interrupt. He let her speak. "I used to believe sacrifice was the measure of worth. The more I gave up, the more I proved myself." She looked at him, eyes burning. "But now I'm starting to think. Maybe love is the greater measure. Not what we lose, but what we protect." Ben's voice was soft. "Maybe the bravest thing isn't staying in the fight. Maybe it's walking away when the war inside you is the one that matters." She looked away, blinking quickly. "I wrote letters too," she said after a pause. "After Matt died, I wrote him every night for almost a year, just to feel like I could still talk to him." Ben's breath caught. "Do you still have them?" She nodded. "Buried in the garage, in an ammo box of all things. Fitting, I guess." He smiled. "I wrote letters too. Not to anyone real. Just to someone I hoped would exist someday." Laura tilted her head, intrigued. "Did you ever send one?" Ben disappeared into the living room and returned with the small wooden box. He placed it on the table, opened the lid, and pushed it toward her. She lifted one of the letters, read the first few lines, and froze. "Dear Laura." Her eyes lifted slowly. "You wrote these before we met?" He nodded. "Years ago." She shook her head, incredulous. "That's surreal. I didn't even realize the name until last night," he said. "I don't know what it means. Maybe nothing." She set the letter down gently, reverently. Or maybe everything. Ben didn't respond. He didn't have to. Outside the window, the wind stirred the budding branches of the old oak tree. Life, as always, continued in its quiet rhythm. Laura glanced at the envelope on the table, then at the wooden box. Then she stood up, picked up the envelope, and walked to the sink. Without a word, she tore it in half. Then in half again. And again. She dropped the pieces into the trash and turned to face him. Ben didn't move, didn't speak. She stepped forward slowly until they were inches apart. Then she whispered, "I choose love," and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was slow, certain, the kind of kiss that said, "I'm still afraid, but I'm not running anymore." When they pulled apart, Laura rested her forehead against his chest. Ben whispered, "What about the girls?" She smiled against his shirt. "They're already asking when Samantha's coming over." He chuckled, and in that moment, with torn orders in the trash, unsent letters, finally read, and 2 broken hearts learning how to beat again, something shifted. Not fate, not destiny, just courage and love. That night, after the girls were tucked in and the house had settled into a comfortable hush, Laura stood barefoot in her kitchen, nursing a cup of tea and staring out the window. The wind had picked up again, rustling through the backyard trees. A few wind chimes danced softly in the breeze, their music light and hollow. She felt full of emotions of warmth, of something real she hadn't felt in a long time. And yet, beneath it all, there was a weight. Something left unsaid. Ben was still in the living room. He'd come by after dinner to help clean up, but the conversation had turned into stories, and the stories into laughter, and somehow they'd ended up watching the girls play a chaotic version of charades while sipping cider on the couch. It had all felt so natural. Too natural. And that's what scared her. Because she knew something he didn't. And she had to tell him now, before what they were building grew too sacred to shatter. She took a breath and stepped into the living room. Ben was flipping through an old photo album the girls had pulled from the shelf. His smile was soft, almost wistful, as he studied pictures of Laura in uniform, of the girls in Halloween costumes, of a younger version of herself that even she barely remembered. When she cleared her throat, he looked up. Something in her face made him sit up straighter. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice quiet but steady. He closed the album. "All right." She sat down, not beside him but across, facing him directly. "Back when we first started talking, when I told you about my husband, Matt." Ben nodded slowly. "There's something I didn't say." She continued. "Something I haven't said to anyone outside command." She looked down at her hands, fingers tightly laced, then back at him. "You were there when he died." Ben didn't move, but his breath caught. "I didn't realize it until after we talked last night," she added. "You mentioned Kandahar, Delta, Operation Hammer Sky. That's where he was. That's where he—" Her voice faltered. Ben's eyes dropped. He stood, slowly walked to the mantel and placed a hand on it, grounding himself. "I remember Hammer Sky," he said quietly. She rose too, standing across the room, her arms crossed, as if holding herself together. "You knew him?" she asked, voice trembling. Ben turned to face her. "Yes," she swallowed. "Were you with him?" "When it happened." He nodded once. "I was his second in that unit. He was good. Brave. Took point when he didn't have to." Ben stopped, voice catching. "He saved us," he said finally. "Took the blast so the rest of us could get out." Laura's eyes welled. She moved toward the window, her back to him. All these years, she whispered, "I only knew what the report said. Friendly fire. Unforeseen variables. But I didn't know how. I didn't know why." Ben's voice was gentle. It was chaos. Fog of war doesn't begin to cover it. But your husband didn't hesitate. He didn't think of himself, just his men. She turned slowly. Her face was pale but composed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ben hesitated. "Because I didn't want you to see me and remember loss. I wanted you to have something new, something untainted." "But it wasn't untainted," she said. "It was always there, underneath. I just didn't know." He took a cautious step forward. "Laura, I've carried that day with me for years. I thought if I ever saw his wife, I'd tell her. But when I met you, you weren't just his widow. You were you, alive, strong, moving forward." She looked up at him, anger, sorrow, and confusion all swirling behind her eyes. "So, what now?" Ben took a deep breath. "Now, I tell you the truth." He walked to the couch, sat down, and motioned for her to do the same. She didn't move at first. Then slowly, cautiously, she joined him. "I never forgot him," Ben said. "Not a day. We talked about his family all the time. He carried a photo of you and the girls. It was wrinkled and faded from being in his breast pocket. He used to say, 'They're my mission. No matter what happens out here, they're my reason.' Laura covered her mouth. He loved you. Fiercely. And he never stopped talking about the kind of mother you were, the kind of strength you had. Tears escaped before she could stop them. She let them fall, not messy, but real. Cleansing. Ben continued, his voice lower now. After he died, I wrote a letter. To you. But I never sent it. Laura looked at him through blurred eyes. I was afraid, he said. Afraid you'd hate me. That knowing I was there wouldn't bring comfort, just pain. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, aged and creased. I've kept this for a long time, he said. It's yours now. She took it with trembling hands. I'm not trying to replace him, Ben said. I couldn't. I wouldn't, but maybe his legacy isn't just the life he gave. Maybe it's the life he saved mine. And maybe that life was meant to be here. With you. Laura stared at the letter, then at Ben. Something shifted in her, not a breaking, but a softening. An unfreezing. She moved closer, laid her head gently against his shoulder. I don't know how to carry all of this, she whispered. You don't have to, he said. Not alone. They sat there in silence, the letter between them. Outside, the wind calmed, and inside so did something else, something heavy that had lingered too long. Not everything was healed. Not yet. But something essential had changed. Forgiveness had entered the room. And where there is forgiveness, love always follows. The kitchen clock ticked quietly as dawn crept across the Brooks household. Pale sunlight washed over the walls, chasing away the last traces of the night. The coffee pot gurgled in the corner, filling the room with the scent of warmth and routine. Laura stood at the kitchen table, her phone in one hand and a pen in the other, staring at a blank resignation form. The header read, Department of the Army Voluntary Separation Request. Her name was typed neatly at the top, Colonel Laura Brooks. Underneath it, a space for a signature, a date, a decision. The girls were still asleep upstairs, their soft breaths echoing through the baby monitor on the counter. The house was peaceful. For once, completely hers. No incoming orders, no briefings, no deployments to prepare for. And yet, this moment, more than any battlefield, had her knees weak. Ben entered quietly, a mug of coffee in each hand. He wore a soft gray flannel shirt sleeves rolled up, and an expression that said he already knew what kind of morning this was. He set a mug beside her without saying a word. Laura glanced at it. Then him. Thanks. He nodded and took a sip of his own. You've been up long since 4, she admitted. Figured. He nodded at the form. That the final version unsigned, she replied, setting the pen down beside it, like it weighed 100 pounds. Ben didn't pressure. He simply leaned against the counter and waited. Laura exhaled slowly. 20 years in the Army, 18 in uniform, half my life. I used to dream about the day I'd get that promotion. Lieutenant Colonel, then full bird. Maybe even a star if I stuck it out. Ben raised an eyebrow. You would have earned it. She smiled, tired. Funny thing is, I don't want it anymore. Not the way I used to. Not if it means missing out on dance recitals, or waking up in an empty house, or explaining to my daughters why I'm not there again. He stepped forward, gently brushing his fingers along the edge of the paper. So what's stopping you? She hesitated. Fear. Regret. Guilt. Take your pick. Ben gave her a long look. You don't owe the Army anything more than you've already given. But those girls upstairs, they're still writing their story. And you get to be a main character in it if you stay. Laura looked down. It feels like I'm betraying something. Or maybe you're finally choosing something. That struck her deeper than she expected. She turned to him. How did you know that it was time to walk away? He paused, thoughtful. I didn't. Not at first. I kept trying to serve in smaller ways, community projects, mentoring younger vets. But eventually I realized the greatest mission I had left was being Samantha's dad. Fully. Not halfway. Not in between deployments. Just there. Laura absorbed his words in silence, then asked quietly, "And you never looked back?" "Every day," he said, but not with regret, with clarity. She nodded slowly, then picked up the pen. Her fingers hovered. Ben waited patient still. Then in one swift motion she signed. Colonel Laura Brooks until today. She set the pen down. The weight lifted. Her shoulders fell. A long breath escaped her lips, and for the first time in years her body truly relaxed. Ben smiled. "You just redefined bravery." Laura turned to him. "It doesn't feel brave. It never does at the moment," he replied. "Only later, when you realize the world didn't end, and the sky didn't fall, and the people you love are still right here." She looked at him for a long beat. "I don't know what comes next." He shrugged. "We make it up as we go." Just then, a thundering stampede of footsteps echoed down the stairs. "Mommy, where's Ben? Did you make waffles? I had a dream. We had a cat." The girls burst into the kitchen like a tiny infantry unit, hair-wild pajamas, mismatched, full of uncontainable energy. Ben knelt down just in time to catch Lexi in mid-leap. She giggled as he swung her up into his arms. Laura smiled at the scene, this strange, unexpected collision of two worlds she never thought could exist in harmony. Motherhood and healing, past and present, duty and love. And in the center of it all, this man. This quiet, steady man who somehow made the impossible feel simple. Girls, she called, clapping her hands. Big news. They turned to her wide-eyed. "I turned in my paperwork today. I'm officially done with the Army." For a moment, they didn't react. Then Lily spoke up. "You mean, like done, Laura confirmed, crouching to their level. "You're not going back to the base?" Leah asked. "Nope." "You're gonna be home every night," Lucy added. "Every single one." Lexi gasped dramatically. "Can we get a trampoline?" Ben laughed, and Laura gave him a look. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." The girls swarmed her in a group hug, knocking her off balance as they wrapped their arms around her with squeals and cheers. Laura laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "I still get to be in charge of you lot, though," she teased. "So don't think I've gone soft." As they cheered and ran off in different directions, no doubt in search of breakfast, or cats, or chaos. Ben stepped beside her. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "You really think I'll be okay?" she asked. He reached out, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and said softly, "No doubt in my mind." They stood together watching the morning unfold. No sirens, no marching orders, just the rising sun, the smell of waffles, and the distant sound of four girls plotting their next adventure. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. A full year later, the scent of sizzling bacon and maple syrup drifted onto the sidewalk outside Maple Diner, drawing in patrons like a song they'd grown up humming. The diner hadn't changed much, still wrapped in its vintage red and white trim, the neon sign flickering a little too much at night, the bell above the door ringing out like an old friend's voice. But something had changed. Inside, every booth was full. Veterans in ball caps adorned with unit patches sat beside high schoolers in varsity jackets. Families sipped coffee and passed ketchup bottles, and in the far back where the sun hit just right through the blinds, a wooden plaque had been mounted to the wall, the Brooks table. Reserved for those who chose love after service, it sat just beneath a photo Laura and Ben standing shoulder to shoulder, each holding a cup of coffee, smiling like the weight of the world had finally set them down. The occasion today was Veteran Appreciation Day, a tradition Doris had started 3 years ago. But this was the first time the diner had needed extra chairs, extra coffee, and an extra shift just to keep up. Laura moved between tables now, in civilian attire, jeans, brown boots, and a navy blue blouse. Her hair was longer loose at the ends, and her smile more frequent, more genuine. She stopped every few minutes to hug an old colleague, shake hands with a young soldier, or refill the coffee of a widow who'd lost her husband decades ago but still wore his dog tags around her neck like a locket. Near the kitchen, Ben stood behind the counter in an apron that read, Flapjack Force 1 in red marker, a title bestowed by Lexi during one chaotic breakfast when he'd made 12 pancakes in the shape of helicopters. He flipped a pancake with one hand, poured coffee with the other, and kept one eye on the door. Sir Doris barked from behind the register. You're double-seated at booth 3. Handle your fans. Ben grinned and slid 2 plates down the counter. Copy that, Sergeant. She smirked. Still the best recruit I ever drafted. Behind them, the front door jingled, and in burst the girls now slightly taller, still chaotic and dressed in matching t-shirts that read, Official Maple Diner Pancake Ambassadors. They rushed in carrying balloons, tiny flags and trays of mini muffins they had baked themselves, or attempted to based on the frosting situation. Samantha walked in behind them, holding a clipboard, and wearing a smile that suggested she was the real commanding officer among the children. Laura swooped in to greet them, crouching as the girls handed out muffins to veterans, each one accompanied by a shy, thank you for your service, or in Lexi's case, a full-on hug. Ben watched the scene unfold from the counter, his chest full of something he didn't quite have words for, something between peace and awe. Laura turned to him, catching his eye across the room. He raised an eyebrow. You coordinating a sugar-fueled uprising? She smirked. No, just raising the next generation of chaos. You're doing a great job. She made her way over, weaving between tables, and leaned on the counter beside him. You ever imagine this? A year ago, Ben shook his head. I didn't even imagine tomorrow back then. They stood in silence for a beat, letting the moment soak in. Then Laura nodded toward a man sitting quietly at a booth in the corner, older, wearing a faded Air Force cap, eyes wet from the muffin delivery. See him, she said. He lost his wife this year. First time he's been out in weeks. Ben looked over. And now he's got whipped cream on his sleeve. Laura smiled. That's healing. In powdered sugar form. He chuckled. Then she sobered slightly, her voice lower. Ben, this place, these people, us, it all feels like home, he finished. She nodded. Just then, Doris tapped a spoon against her water glass. The room quieted, a ripple of stillness moving outward from the counter. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment, she said. I know y'all are here for pancakes and free refills, but I wanted to say something. She glanced toward Laura and Ben. Every year, this day reminds us of what we've lost, but more importantly, what we've found in each other. Family doesn't always wear the same uniform. Sometimes it walks in late with 4 little girls in red jackets and turns your life upside down. A wave of warm laughter passed through the room. Doris continued. So today we honor service, but we also honor second chances, the kind that show up when you least expect them. She raised her glass. To the veterans, and to the ones who never stopped choosing love, even when it was the hardest thing to do. The crowd echoed, to love. Applause followed. Laura blinked quickly and wiped her eye before the girls could notice. Ben reached under the counter and pulled out something he'd tucked away for months, a small hand-carved wooden sign. He held it out to Laura. She read the engraving. Her rank was love. She looked up at him, emotion blooming in her chest. Ben. I thought maybe we could hang it beneath the plaque, he said quietly. She nodded, speechless. Together they walked to the back wall just under the photograph. The crowd parted as they moved. Ben nailed the sign gently into place, the final piece of a story they never planned, but now couldn't imagine life without. As they stepped back, the diner erupted in applause, again. Not for pancakes, not for speeches, but for them. For what they had become. Laura leaned in and whispered, "You think this is what peace feels like?" Ben didn't answer right away. He took her hand, squeezed it, and said, "No. I think this is what homecoming feels like." Outside, the spring breeze lifted the American flag in front of the diner, the sunlight catching the stars as it fluttered proudly above the building. And beneath it all, inside that little diner in a sleepy Virginia town, 2 veterans, 6 kids, and a room full of hearts sat wrapped in the kind of warmth that only comes when love at long last is allowed to stay. It was a Sunday like any other, but then again, in the lives of those who had once worn the uniform, there was no such thing as an ordinary day. Each quiet morning, each gentle laugh, each unremarkable moment held the weight of all the extraordinary ones that came before. The sun stretched itself across Maple Diner, filtering through the front windows and lighting up the old floors like gold. Outside the parking lot was full, not with strangers, but with regulars, with family. With those who knew this wasn't just a diner. It was a place where things ended, and then somehow began again. At their usual booth in the back, the Brooks table, Laura sat with a pen in hand, reviewing a document on a clipboard. Not a government form this time, no official seal, no classified headers, just a vision. Across the top in bold letters, Maple Diner Veterans Outreach Program, Community Proposal. Ben sat beside her, reading over her shoulder, sipping coffee that he'd brewed himself an hour earlier. These days, he arrived before sunrise to get the kitchen prepped. He'd never worked in food service before, but Doris had eventually handed him the keys, like she was passing on a family heirloom. "You really think we can pull this off?" Laura asked, scribbling a note in the margins. "Absolutely," he said. "We're talking job assistance, grief support, reintegration training, family therapy, add free coffee, and I think you'll have them lined out the door." Laura laughed, tilting her head toward him. "You think coffee solves everything, don't you? I think coffee and courage solves most things." She smiled, and her fingers grazed his on the table. There was no hesitation in her touch anymore, no caution, just warmth. The bell above the door jingled, and the girls walked in now, a little older, more independent, but still unmistakably the same squad of chaos and heart. Samantha followed close behind her backpack, slung over one shoulder, her glasses slipping slightly down her nose. She was tall for her age now, with her father's quiet eyes and her mother's resilience, even if her mother existed only in stories and pictures. Laura stood to greet them. "You ready for your first day?" Samantha nodded nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be." Today she would begin shadowing Doris, part of her summer project, local service in small-town America. But more than that, she was carving her own space in the world her father and Laura had built, not out of war, but out of healing. Lexi held up a handmade sign. "We made flyers," Leah chimed in. For the veteran project, Lucy added, "Lily made sure it had grammar and stuff." Ben took one of the flyers and grinned. Bold red letters, glitter accents, and a misspelled quote attributed to President Abraham Lincoln. "Close enough," he said. Lily rolled her eyes. "I'll fix it before we post them, I promise." Laura ruffled her daughter's hair. "You're turning into quite the little leader." Lily crossed her arms proudly. "I get it from you." Ben looked between them and felt a now familiar pang, not of pain but of something deeper. Wholeness. This wasn't the life he'd expected. Not after war. Not after widowhood. Certainly not after that first blind date, where he'd thought he'd been stood up and ended up with 4 kids and a colonel instead. But this was the life he was meant for. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, a stranger walked into the diner. Older. Weathered. Navy cap on his head. Eyes scanning the room, not with hunger, but with hesitation. Ben noticed. He walked over. "Welcome." The man hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm in the right place. Someone told me there was a vet program here." Ben gestured to the booth where Laura sat with a clipboard and an open heart. "You're exactly where you're meant to be." The man took a seat. Laura leaned in, shook his hand, and so it began again. Another story, another life, crossing into theirs. That night after the dishes were done and the girls tucked in, Ben and Laura stood outside the diner beneath the warm glow of the porch light. The wind was soft. The air smelled like earth and sugar and possibility. Ben wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You know I've been thinking about something." "Oh no," she teased. "That always means trouble. I keep thinking about that day. The first day. The empty table." She smiled. "I remember. You looked like a man who was ready to leave before the coffee even cooled." "I was," he admitted. But then 4 little messengers showed up. Laura leaned her head against his chest. "And I showed up late, and I realized something." Ben continued. "What's that?" "That maybe love doesn't arrive on time. Maybe it doesn't follow orders, doesn't wear a schedule, doesn't come with a plan." He paused. "Maybe it just shows up. When you finally stop trying to command it." Laura closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. "I spent so long trying to outrank life," she whispered, "trying to lead it, control it. But in the end, the only thing worth surrendering to was this." He looked down at her. "Love," she nodded. "Love." They stood there for a long time, no words needed. Above them, the old diner sign flickered in the evening light. Across the way, a neighbor played soft jazz on a porch radio. Somewhere, a wind chime sang. Laura lifted her eyes to his. "Ben, yeah, I never asked. Those letters. The ones you wrote. The ones that started, 'Dear Laura,' before you even knew me." "What did they say?" He smiled, pulling something from his pocket. A small folded page, worn fragile but intact. He handed it to her. She unfolded it carefully. "Dear Laura, I don't know if you exist, but I hope you do. I hope you're strong and stubborn and funny in the way I need. I hope you've been through just enough pain to understand mine, but not so much that you've stopped believing. I hope you find me someday in a quiet diner with an empty table and a hopeful heart. And I promise I'll recognize you when you walk in, no matter how late you are. Ben." When she finished reading, her hands trembled, and then she kissed him, not because it was expected, but because it was inevitable. Because everything they'd built, everything they'd overcome, everything they now stood for, had led them here. Not as soldiers, not as survivors, but as something infinitely stronger. And so the girl who once wore stars on her shoulder found something more powerful than rank. She found rest. She found laughter. She found love. And for the first time in her life, she chose to lead, not with orders, but with openness. Because in the end, her greatest mission was not a battlefield. It was a booth in a diner. A man with calloused hands and kind eyes. And 4 little girls who believed in second chances. Her rank was no longer colonel. Her rank was love. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Your hometown? Or maybe a time you witnessed love show up when it was least expected. Your stories matter here. And if this one touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel, A Quiet Corner of YouTube, where we honor kindness, resilience, and the beauty of second chances. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you love.